welcome our guest speaker, Justin Paperny. I will let him tell you his story and more about himself, but I do want to say that Justin's been a great friend to USC Leventhal. He has spoken for a number of years. You should be familiar with him already because of the Ethics in Motion book that we covered. Justin is a graduate of USC. And without further ado, I will turn it over to Justin. So Justin, welcome. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I'm grateful for the invitation. First and foremost, hope everyone watching and that you know and love and care for are safe and healthy during this difficult time. I would have loved nothing more than to have been on campus today, speaking with you, as I think I've done more than 100 times over the last 10 years. But let's do the best we can. And my goal is to educate and help you understand how good people can make bad choices and, unfortunately, in some cases, end up on the wrong side of prison boundaries. When I film videos on YouTube or speak with people about white-collar crime, they frequently jump to white-collar defendants or are greedy. And that's what we always hear first. And I want to convey anything through my talk today. Certainly greed was a symptom of my conduct, what led me away. But it's not always the biggest factor. And I share that with you because earlier today, our company began working with a white-collar defendant who is worth in excess of $100 million. And if you were to speak with him, you'd learn a lot from him about leadership and business. In fact, I will end up learning more from him than he will ever learn from me. And I share this because if you were to read some of the comments in the New York Times or Reuters about his case, people would say he's greedy, he's short-sighted, he's stupid. The only one of those three I would agree with is short-sightedness. And that's what I want to convey to you. The only reason that people end up on the wrong side of prison boundaries or make bad choices that could lead to time on the inside is because we don't fully consider how every action or decision can impact the rest of our life. And that's the salient point from my talk today. When I was in federal prison, I read one public speaking book. It was Dale Carnegie's book on public speaking. That's the only one I've ever read. And in that book, it said, convey one salient point. And that's the point I want to convey right now. And that's probably how I'll close with this lecture. The people with whom my company at White Collar Advice works, and it's been more than 1,000 white-collar defendants over the last decade, most of them are not greedy. Most of them were not born criminals. Who wakes up and says, today's the day I'm going to break the law, ruin my reputation, embarrass my family, lose everything? Who does that? Very few people. It's simply because we made choices without considering how it would influence our community, our victims, and our family. And that's the point that you'll get from my story. With respect to my story, I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time talking about my parents and my upbringing because I figure I put my parents through enough, but also because I can sum it up pretty simply when I say, like many of you, I hit the parent lottery in life. Okay, I had privilege and opportunities that many people I know could have only dreamed. Many of my clients, many of my brothers and sisters could have only dreamed of. So my parents guided me properly. I grew up in Encino, which is a Jewish enclave about 30 minutes away from USC, maybe 40 minutes. Had an opportunity to go to a lot of great schools, from Stanford to back east to Notre Dame to Cal. I chose USC in part because my father owns a business that's a few miles away, and I had the opportunity to play baseball. And I was a proud member of the USC baseball team. We lost in the national championship game in '95. Through baseball and my parents, but really my parents, I learned about discipline and commitment and hard work. I was held accountable if I did something wrong. USC, I didn't get my study hours in. I didn't play. And if you couldn't practice, you couldn't play. So that level of accountability really gave way to a different course of decision-making when I graduated USC in 1997. I have a degree from USC in psychology. I was planning to go to graduate school. Though my sophomore year at USC, I began interning at Goldman Sachs in downtown Los Angeles, the 333 South Grand. I had a cousin, I have a cousin I write about in Lessons from Prison, which I know you're not required to read. I have a cousin I call Todd Goodman in Lessons from Prison, who is a distinguished money manager at Goldman Sachs. And my mom reached out to him with the goal that I could learn more about the brokerage business. So my sophomore year at USC, I showed up at Goldman Sachs in downtown Los Angeles, like 4 o'clock in the morning. And within 30, 40 minutes, I began to hear $50, $100 million bond trades. And just like that, I was hooked. And I knew any degree that I would have in psychology would be utterly useless because trading and that amount of money and being on the floor of Goldman Sachs told me this is where I want to be. The thrill of that trading room reminded me of playing baseball in front of 15 or 20,000 people. So when I graduated USC with a degree in psychology, I immediately began working as a young salesman at Merrill Lynch, which eventually was bought up by Bank of America in 2008. Now look, as a young salesman, my job was simply to cold call, to bring in customers for my senior partners. And cold calling is difficult. If I were in the classroom right now at USC, I'd ask all the students to raise your hand and say, how many of you have cold called? It's incredibly difficult. It's humbling. It can be embarrassing. A lot of FUs, drop dead, don't ever call here again. But with $60,000 in student loans and wanting to be successful and wanting to be first in my class out of USC, or at least first with a young brokerage room, it was a values play. I was willing to endure some pain and embarrassment with the hopes that I could get a client or two by way of cold calling. I wasn't so concerned about what my young stockbroker friends thought about me on the floor. I was more concerned about making my massive student loan payment to USC. Even though I was a student athlete at USC, my scholarship was like $6, okay? And if you think USC is expensive now, it was still expensive back then in 1993. So with a lot of days cold calling, getting in at 5, leaving at 10, it was tough. Now, something that I've suffered with in life, it could be both good and bad, is a little bit of obsessiveness. It made me a good athlete. It made me a good young executive in beginning to build business. But I was so focused, not just on growing my business and being tops in my class, but also being able to sustain myself and live a life that I thought my parents would be proud of, a life that I thought my clients who had $1 million would be proud of. And I'll speak to that right now. There's this myth as a young executive, and I've discussed this with executives of KPMG, Wells Fargo, Goldman Sachs, a lot of my corporate clients across the country. I discussed this with FBI agents when I lectured at the academy, and they say, why do so many good people go rogue and go bad and break the law? What is it they're hoping to achieve? Who do they want to impress? Why do they need to live a lifestyle in 3 years where maybe it takes 10? And that was something to a degree that I suffered from. I was under the impression that if I'm going to manage your $1 million, that I should look like I have $1 million. So right after I graduated USC, I began to buy some things I couldn't afford, like this Rolex I still wear, and a BMW I leased that I couldn't afford. I bought a home that frankly I couldn't afford. And there are some that will say, spend, spend, spend. You'll find a way to pay for it. But I didn't do it for that reason. I did it because if I'm going to ask you for your $1 million, I need to look like I'm making it. And now at 45, with a lot of years of sales and a prison term behind me, I know it's utter nonsense. My wealthiest friend, I call him Larry David because he drives around Los Angeles in a Prius that must be 20 years old with 400,000 miles, and he's incredibly wealthy. He's smart, he's shrewd, he's deliberate. He's not so concerned with what other people think, but by the value he can provide to his customer or client. That was a mistake I had. So right out of USC, I have a lot of debt. And the cold calling in time, I wasn't as successful. I just wasn't good at it. And after about a year or so, I decided there would be a different way for me to grow my business as a young stockbroker. And frankly, it's the same thing I did when I got out of prison. It's how I found USC. When I struggled as a young stockbroker, I began cold walking. If I were in class right now, I'd say, raise your hand if any of you have ever cold walked. That is the hardest thing I've ever done in life, harder than surrendering to federal prison, that much I can tell you. When I was a young broker, I would leave the office, I would walk along Ventura Boulevard in Encino, Sherman Oaks, Studio City, walking into coffee shops, retailers, banks, law offices, trying to hand out my card to anyone that would give me an opportunity to tell them why Merck or Boeing or Bristol Myers was a good company for them to buy. And I'll tell you what, while cold walking is hard, it is impactful. And it's better than cold calling. And I encourage any of you, if you're salespeople and you're looking to grow your business, once this pandemic is over and we're allowed to shake hands and mix and mingle and talk, cold walk if you have the courage to do so, because people respond differently to you in person than they do on the phone. And because of that cold walking, and as a lot of people would say, you had the chutzpah to walk in here, even as people laughed at me, even as some people threw me out of the office. Do you know what no solicitation means? I had a book of business to build, and I had $60,000 in loans from USC. I believed in what I was selling. That's why I was willing to deal with some embarrassment. So that cold walking led to $10 million, and then $20 million, and then $30 million under management. And after a couple of years at Merrill Lynch, something interesting happened. The brokerage business began to change. In other words, senior brokers, like my branch manager, and this is very important for those of you who will join senior partnership someday. My senior broker at Merrill Lynch wanted me to merge my book of business with a senior broker that he was going to choose. And I didn't want to do it. I said, I'm doing great. I've been in the business a couple of years. I got 30 plus million under management. I'm making a few $100,000 a year. My clients love me. They're taking me golfing. They're introducing me to their friends. I'm going to the country club with them. I'm doing a decent job managing their money. No complaints. I'm not generating commission trades just for a commission. Like, I'm doing great. I'm good. I'm on my own. And my branch manager said, look, this is the way Merrill Lynch is going. We want you to merge your book of business with a senior broker. And I said, let me think about it. He said, fine, come back to me. We'll discuss it further. So over the next 60 days, I did what I encourage a lot of our clients to do on the first day of federal prison, which is to do a lot of watching and studying and thinking and assessing the landscape rather than talking. And during that, 45, 60 days, whatever, I began to notice my friends who were in my training class with. I noticed my friends who had merged their book of business with the senior broker. I began to see them flunk out of the business. I'm like, well, that's interesting. You're failing. You're not making more money. Here's some takeaways. One, a lot of the junior brokers were merging their book of business with a senior broker because they thought it would lead to eternal life in the brokerage industry. Like, my gosh, my senior partner's been doing this for 25 years. He's got $1 billion under management. I can now call him my partner. There's no way I can flunk and fail out of the business. Not so. Those junior brokers ended up managing that senior broker's book of business all day, which didn't allow them to prospect. And they got a very small cut of the commissions, essentially stopping their ability to grow and make money. And we're commission salesmen. We have no salary. So then I'm watching and I'm learning. Then one day in the human resource room, I'll never forget it, till the day I die, I heard a senior broker talking about $10 million in assets that he had raised that day. And I congratulated him. I said, congratulations, that's fantastic. That's a huge day. $10 million. How'd you do it? I want to learn. Tell me. He said, well, unfortunately, and I knew where he was going. You have intuition as an executive. He said, well, fortunately, a few of the guys I was mentoring, it didn't quite work out. I'm like, well, be more clear. He's using euphemisms, didn't work out. What he should have said was, I stole their book of business. I brought them in to be my junior broker. I didn't mentor them. They did all my dirty work throughout the day, managing my books of clients, giving stock quotes all day. That's before iPhones and E-Trade, where you can get a stock quote in 3 seconds. You actually needed to call a broker to find out where Microsoft closed. That's what they did all day. And because they weren't making enough money, they flunk out of the business. A senior broker usurps that book of business. That's how he was growing his assets under management. I said, ain't going to be me. No, I'm good. I'll fail on my own. I'm good. Thank you. So when my branch manager at Merrill Lynch gave me an ultimatum, I don't like ultimatums in life. I don't know how you feel about them. Not a fan. Sometimes I'll even make the wrong choice just because I don't want to be compelled to take an ultimatum. That's me. He said, if you're not going to be part of our senior broker team, we're going to have to, you're going to have to give some thought to it. It was a threat. And I said, okay, I'll leave. And he said, you're not leaving. I said, I resign. And I did. And I took my book of business. All my clients went with me. They liked me. I did a good job. Went to a very small brokerage firm called Crow Wheaton, and there I was, growing my business. Now, after a year or so at a very small firm like Crow Wheaton, a little bit of arrogance took hold. Like, how could I be 25 and the number one guy in my office? That's absurd. 1, 2, no one's heard of Crow Wheaton. I'm going on pitches. No one's heard of Crow Wheaton. This is absurd. 3, I began to reach out to professional athletes. And one of them was a gentleman named Danny who ran the Beverly Hills Sports Council. I should say Danny was a baseball agent for players like Mike Piazza, and Jason Kendall, and Trevor Hoffman, and some big name guys. And because I was a baseball player at USC, some of my initial clients were baseball players. So I understood how a baseball player thought. I understood I'm a baseball player. I feel like I'll always be a baseball player, even though at the alumni game every year I can hardly hit the ball. I know how a baseball player thinks. And I went out to Danny and I said, I'd love to begin working with a number of your players, your athletes. He said, dude, you're 25, you're too young, you're green. I didn't even know what that meant then, still hardly know now. You're green, nobody knows you. I can't give you Mike Piazza's money. Are you nuts? You're 25. So give me an opportunity. I'm doing well. Here are some client reviews. They love me. I'm doing a great job. I'm killing it. He said, well, I cannot refer you directly to them. You're too young, but let me connect you with a colleague, a former Trojan named Kenny, who's a senior broker at Bear Stearns in Century City. I said, oh, Bear's a good spot. Introduced me to Kenny. He lined up a meeting with Kenny, a senior broker, about 7 years older than me, 8 years older than me. And Kenny and I have a meeting in Beverly Hills. And over that meeting, we decide that we're going to merge our book of business. Now, do you understand the disconnect? It was like 3 minutes ago I said to you I would never merge my book of business because I felt like the senior brokers were leveraging off the minds of young brokers, taking their book of business because they were lazy and it's the only way they were bringing their assets under management. And I left Merrill Lynch because I said I would never be a part of a partnership. Now, hardly 18 months later, I've gone from Merrill Lynch to Kroll Weeden, and now I'm contemplating Bear Stearns. Why? It's a values play. Our values change in life. It was of higher value for me at 26 to say that I worked at Bear Stearns, the youngest broker they ever hired in that office. I was willing to deal with the inconvenience of suddenly becoming a part of a partnership, something I previously loathed and sickened me. And I want you to be aware of that as your business grows. As you get older in life, your values will change. At 26, it would have been a big deal for me to be a broker at Bear Stearns. Only 6 offices in the whole country. That was a big deal. So I was willing to accept that partnership with Kenny. Now, the day I went to Bear Stearns, I had, $30 million or so under management. Kenny had $100 million collectively. I think we can do the math. $130 million under management. The day I went to Bear Stearns, the agreement was I would get 25% of the commissions. In other words, Greg calls in and says, hey, Justin, I'd like to buy 500 shares of Amazon. It's at $2 a share. Now you wouldn't be working anymore if you owned it at $2 a share, 500 shares. I want to buy 500 shares. The commission's $1,000. Great. Under our agreement, I would get 25% of the commissions. Kenny would get 75%. That was our agreement the day I began working at Bear Stearns. Fine. Great. Well, within about 3 or 4 months, I brought in a client that was generating $100,000 a month in production. It was a hedge fund client, a kid who graduated UCSB, started a little hedge fund, went out to some rich friends who sold a business, gave him $4 million, brought the money to me at Bear Stearns, and just like that, he's trading through me, doing $100,000 a month in production. It's really taking up most of my time. And because it's taking so much of my time, I'm beginning to neglect, for the first time, some of my clients that kind of got me my start in the business. I want you to think about that as your business grows, as you begin to make more money, as you begin to associate with new people. What about the people that got you started? So now at Bear, I'm so fixated and frankly obsessed with this client doing $100,000 a month, I'm beginning to ignore some of my clients that got me started in the brokerage business. And I've said before, and I'll say it again, it's not illegal to treat clients differently, I suppose, but it is unethical. And if you're out for your own self-interest to grow your business, you're going to get punished. And I began to get punished when all I did was focus on this client doing $100,000 a month. And after about 6 months of $100,000 a month, I did what any of you should do. At least I hope you do if you're generating massive amounts of goodwill and delivering massive amounts of revenue for your employer. I did what any of you should do. You ask for a raise. Okay, so when you're getting 25% of the production, and you've then brought in someone who's making up like half of the whole company's production, you should no longer be getting 25% of the production. So I went in and I asked my senior business partner for a raise. Now, you don't ask for a raise based on need. I need to make more money. I have student loans. No, it's based on performance, on metrics. And that's what I did. I had my Google sheet and I walked in with the data and I said, look at the production. I could have kind of threw the data in front of my senior business partner in an arrogant way. I was kind of arrogant at that age, making that much money, performing at that level. I will admit, I got to own that. And when I asked him for the raise, he began to laugh and chuckle. I said, I don't really know what's funny. No one's laughing but you. Why are you laughing? I brought in a client that's doing $100,000 a month. I get 25% of the production. I'm not saying you got to take me to 50%, but come on, dude, give me a raise. I'm working like a dog. I get in at 5, I leave at 10. Okay, when I graduated USC, I was an athlete. I was fit, strong, and in shape. I'd put on 40 pounds. The Paperny cheeks, they're genetic anyway. Imagine them 40 pounds heavier. They were huge. It was awful. I was a slave to work. The least I could get was a raise. You know what I also could have used? A thank you. I appreciate you. I saw this KPMG study that said employees sometimes don't value a raise as much as appreciation or a thank you. My senior partner never thanked me for the long, hard days of getting early and leaving late. His response would be, you're paid a good wage, shut up and do your job. Some truth to that. Some people, like my brother, don't need a thank you. Some clients of mine don't need a thank you. I appreciate a thank you. I value you. Kudos, good job. I didn't get the appreciation, I didn't get the thank you, and certainly I didn't get a raise because he then took credit for my being at Bear Stearns because of him. He took credit for this client that I brought in, and then I began to feel like, God, this is a sickening industry. Unlike my coaches at USC who held me accountable and my parents who raised me to know right from wrong, I felt like working with snakes and people that were only advancing their own agenda at the expense of others was the way that it worked. And I could have left, started over, but I didn't want to cold walk again at 27 when I'm making 500 grand a year. It was humbling enough at 23 out of USC. It was easier then. Humbling enough out of jail when I had no money and no business. That's the time to do it. I didn't want to do it again at 27. I didn't want to start over. So I had an opportunity and I had a choice, and I made the wrong choice because the next day when Greg called in to sell his 500 shares of Amazon and the commission was $1,000, let me tell you what I did. I found a glitch in the accounting system at Bear Stearns that allowed me to keep the whole $1,000 commission. The whole thing. And then a week later, Greg called in to buy 500 shares of Microsoft. Commission was $2,000. I'm only owed 25% pursuant to our partnership. $500? Oh no, I took 100%, took the whole $2,000 commission. So as a young executive, I began to feel this pressure to be recognized for my hard work, pressure to get a thank you. I began to rationalize this unfairness, and this is the way this industry works. Rationalize that everyone is only out for themselves, and I'm working with snakes in a sickening industry. And then, of course, the opportunity that I seized, taking commissions to which I was not entitled. And over the next year, I probably took 50 or 60,000 in commissions, a paltry sum compared to what I thought I was really due, truth be told. But then something got a hold of me. I feared I was going to get caught. That's the worst thing. I will admit, of the 1,000 federal prison consulting clients white-collar advice has had, many of them have walked in and turned themselves into the U.S. Attorney's Office before they were ever told they were under investigation. Why? The guilt, the shame, the nervousness, are they going to get caught? That can often be the hardest part. So over that next year, every time the phone rang, I'd think, oh my God, somebody found out I got caught. Every time an email would come in, I'd say, oh my God, they found out I stole commissions from my senior partner. I could hardly function. I could hardly sleep. I certainly ignored all of my other clients, and I began to try to cover my steps from this idea that I would get caught. And frankly, still in my mind, I don't think I took anything to which I was not entitled. Then after about a year or so, a huge opportunity came. Huge break. My senior partner called and said, Merrill, UBS, a competing brokerage firm across the street in Century City, would like to give us $1 million to move our book of business from Bear Stearns to UBS. I was like, great, done. Let's go. Love UBS. He's like, do you know anything about the bank? I'm like, no, sounds great. Better for our clients. Let's go. I'm over Bear Stearns. Let's wrap it up. He's like, would you want to hear terms of the deal? I said, I'm sure it's great. I trust you. I've had enough of Bear Stearns. We're done. It's fine. Let's go to UBS. Let's take the $1 million, split it. We're on our way. So over the course of the next few weeks, we negotiated the deal. We moved to UBS, cashed the check. But frankly, I didn't even care about the money. The money was great, I suppose. I was so grateful that I had got away from Bear Stearns without getting caught. I was an arrogant, naive, to a degree insecure, short-sighted kid who, as I said earlier, didn't consider how my actions or choices would influence other people. I was short-sighted. Who cares if you make $100,000 today if it's to your long-term detriment? Who cares if you make big cash today with no value system, because eventually you're going to end up on the wrong side of prison boundaries like I did. Or if you don't go to prison, you're going to lose your job. You're going to get sued civilly. Your reputation is going to be tarnished. Most of you will never go to jail. I recognize that. But beginning to make bad choices and moving away from any ethical core after I graduated USC. So I wrote an Ethics in Motion. I think I read 2 books after I graduated USC. Both were Tiger Woods books. I got stupid, other than a singular passion for sales and growth and serving my clients. But still, I stopped focusing on any other areas of my life. And because of that, I began to think that this is just the way the world worked. And I had a singular pursuit to grow. And at UBS, after about 3 months, we had a problem. So let me be clear. You don't get $1 million without heavy expectations. Okay? So when we went to UBS, we had, call it $140 million or so under management, maybe $150 million. And they give you a bonus based on your trailing 12-month production. That's how we got more than $1 million or something like that. And after we went to UBS, something very troubling happened. After 3 or 4 months, we'd only brought over half of our book of business. And certainly management wasn't happy. After 6 months, we only had a little bit more than 50% of our book of business. So they've given us this bonus based on assets and production they can expect, and 6 months later, we're halfway there. UBS is beginning to call us into their office. Where's the production? Where's the assets? What are you doing? They would, kind of like something like you saw in Boiler Room or Wolf of Wall Street. There would be a list every month of where you ranked production-wise relative to your peers, and I was always at the top. And it was suddenly humbling to walk to my corner office. People probably didn't think that I had earned or was worthy of to see my name at the bottom of the list. So you begin to think like, my God, you got this huge bonus. They probably regret it. Why? Why weren't we producing? And then as I continued to call former clients of mine at Bear Stearns to let them know that I had moved to UBS and they should come with me, the aha moment came when I spoke with a very nice woman named Pam, who lived in Palmdale. She managed an investment group of like 15 women. I managed their $10 million or so under management. It was like a female women's trading group. It was great. I loved it. I used to go out there every 4 or 6 weeks to talk about their portfolio, what Bear Stearns or whatever had to say. It took me months to finally get her on the phone. I said, well, where have you been? I've been tracking and calling you. I sent you the paperwork. I've moved from Bear Stearns to UBS. And she very politely said, Justin, I've been thinking a lot about this. I like you. You're smart. You're a good executive. You were great in the beginning. But you forgot about us as you got into these professional baseball players and going to spring training and hopping on private jets. And we feel like you forgot about us. And we like the woman with whom we're now working at Bear Stearns. So we're going to stick with her for a while. And we're not transferring our investment money over. And that's when it hit me. Obsessing over a raise for my senior business partner, to a degree being enamored with these professional athletes, going to spring training, going in the clubhouse, and so on, led me to neglect clients who had given me my start. And that's why 6 months in, we'd only brought over maybe $70 or $80 million of the assets that we had under management. And now I went from getting this bonus to thinking I'm going to get fired. And in my experience at UBS, and frankly in the brokerage business in whole, you're treated differently based on how much you produce. There's a 2-tier system of justice for my job. I'm speaking like a prison consultant, forgive me. There's a 2-tier system of conduct as an executive. If you produced, you were treated one way. If you didn't produce, you were treated another way. And you can argue that probably still goes on till this day. So when I was producing and killing it, all good, no problems. When my production was down, I noticed that there could be loopholes in this contract, this bonus they gave me to get it back. I began to see colleagues of mine getting let go and fired who weren't producing. So I went from a high of this check and leaving Bear Stearns without getting caught from stealing commissions from my partner. Let's not euphemize it. I stole. Now I think I'm going to lose my job. So I had to find another opportunity to get my commissions whole. And that opportunity came the 16th of June, 2002. 1 year to the day after I went to UBS. I received a call from a gentleman named Keith who ran a hedge fund. Hedge fund had only $6 million or so under management, but I knew the hedge fund would generate a ton of commissions. And like $100,000 a month, like the prior hedge fund client that I had. And I knew $100,000 a month could get us way back, or where UBS was frankly expecting us to produce. So June 16, 2002, we took Keith's $6 million. After I get off the phone with him, I run into my senior business partner's office and I said, I've got great news. We have a new client. It's going to save us for the time being. It's going to generate a lot of production. And I said, I'm going to go get the paperwork signed. He said, great. Kenny said, great. My senior partner, is there anything I need to do? Anything I need to know? And I said, well, he's like, you're stuttering, like you're rambling. Is there anything I need to know about our new client? I said, well, I used to work with the guy. He's like, what the hell does that mean? I'm like, well, I used to work with him at Crowell Weedon a few years ago. He's like, great. Can you be more clear? I'm like, I'll try. Keith used to work in the cubicle right next door to me. He's like, great. And I would hear some things that Keith would say on the phone. He's like, can you be more clear? I'm like, dude, he lies. He lies. He will say anything to close a deal. He will say anything to get a commission. In fact, there was one full day in my brokerage career where I sat there all day in a chair like this, and I just sat there like this, and I actually listened as Keith, I would just sit here like this. I listened as our new client, Keith, would cold call prospects or clients and lie to them in order to sell a stock or generate a commission. That was one full day in my career. He was always rewarded, always made money, always got a bigger office. So I shared this with Kenny as I share it with all of you. The day I took our client $6 million, I knew that he was dishonest. I knew he would say anything to close a deal, but so was I. Was it my job to obsess or work on the morality of my client? I had money to raise. I had commissions to produce. And to that end, we took the $6 million and it went exactly as I had hoped. $100,000 a month, every month. Every month, $100,000 in production. And here's the beauty of it. This is when we began to kind of scheme with our colleagues a little bit at UBS. All the trades were unsolicited. Hi, Justin Keith, sell 20,000 puts on Microsoft. Hi, Justin Keith, buy 5,000 calls on QLogic. Great. Commission, unsolicited trade, 6 to 10 cents a share, $50,000, $100,000, $125,000 a month in production. All unsolicited. I have no risk. If anything, I have no risk. They're his assets under management. The individual investors in his hedge fund are not my clients. They do not have accounts with me. I had one client, the GLT Venture Fund, and all the assets in there were his. I simply executed the trade. So we felt like we had like the most beautiful setup you could possibly imagine. Assets under management, heavy trades, unsolicited execution without any responsibility for managing the money. Pretty good deal. And UBS loved it. And they also loved the commissions. We loved them.
This is great. A quick question just to make sure everybody is on the same page. Could you just back up for 1 second and talk about when accounts are set up as an unsolicited trade account, just what that means for the students?
Sure. So with an unsolicited trade account, when Keith would call, as a stockbroker, there were trades that I would solicit. So I may call Greg and say, hey, Greg, I think Microsoft's a good opportunity. You should buy 500 shares. I'm soliciting the trade. I'm recommending it. And when you put off a trade ticket or when you check the ticket as a broker, you have to check solicited or unsolicited. Solicited or unsolicited. So if I solicited you to buy Microsoft, I would have to check off on the box solicited. When Keith called us, I always checked the box unsolicited, which meant we had very little risk. That's a big deal in the brokerage business. Who's recommending or not recommending the trade? So because all of these trades were unsolicited, we felt as if we had this beautiful path to easy commissions that would continue for forever. But something unfortunate happened. When Keith transferred in $6 million, within 6 months he lost it. Let's talk about that for a second. He brought in $6 million. Within 6 months or so, he lost it. You then fast forward another 6 months. He brought in $6 million. He lost it. So even though the trades were unsolicited and I didn't manage or recommend one of them, even though the people who invested in his hedge fund were not clients of ours, they did not have individual accounts at UBS, even though we felt we had that protection, we knew that he had raised $12 million and lost it. And we knew that he was generating $100,000 a month in production. Our intuition alone immediately told us, well, I knew he was a thief because I worked with him years earlier. And I knew that he was only raising money by lying to people. How many of you on this video are listening of the 206 people would buy this sales presentation if Keith went into your home? Hi, nice to meet you. I'd love for you to invest in my hedge fund. We're killing it this year. We're doing great. Although the last few months have been tough, in fact, we're down 100% in the last 3 months, but I'd still love your $1 million. What do you think? You'd probably say, I have to call security, leave my home, or I'm going to throw you out. I don't think you'd invest if you knew that he was down 100%. No investor in their right mind would. So of course we knew that he was making misrepresentations and lying to people in order to raise money. But we didn't stop it. We didn't fire him. If anything, we began to scheme at UBS to ensure the gravy train of commissions continued. Here's how, and here's how the corporate culture worked. Despite UBS sponsoring golf tournaments and their UBS values employees first or customers first and all the platitudes that a lot of these corporate companies love to say on TV, the culture in my experience was much different than the code that they promoted on TV or in the press. The culture was produce and grow as much as you possibly can, consequences be damned. Because with these commissions, we felt eventually we're going to get sued. Eventually he's going to run out of money. Eventually they're not going to go to him. They can sue the hedge fund manager, but he's going to have no money left. They're going to sue the big bank. So I wanted to protect ourselves from any fallout, any liability. So after 7 or 8 months of massive commissions and heavy losses, I went to my branch manager and I, along with my senior partner, said, I fear we're going to get sued when these losses continue. Branch manager said, what do you have in mind? I said, well, allow me to write up an indemnification agreement, a letter that essentially says, if anyone chooses to invest in this hedge fund, You do so at your own will. You are not being forced or cajoled to invest in this hedge fund by UBS. You totally indemnify us. You're making this investment at your own volition. And UBS loved the idea to the point that UBS compliance, both in Stanford and New York, lauded my efforts to keep this account alive while protecting it. Sent the disclosure letter or indemnification agreement to Keith, and I said, Keith, the hedge fund manager, anytime you send me 3 cents or $1 million, you make sure this indemnification agreement is signed, stating that UBS or any of our executives or employees did not recommend this investment. And Keith said, great. Anytime I get it signed, I will, anytime I raise new money, I will send it over to you. And I said, perfect. So that was the first year or so. Losses, this agreement, I felt heavily protected because of this disclosure document that we got signed that would protect us from any fallout. But then money raised and money lost, and it continued. And eventually, when I'm unethical, you heard earlier what I had done to my senior business partner. You heard that I was neglecting some clients as I began to grow my business and fixate on the baseball players. You heard that I was making bad choices. I had no moral compass guiding me. I wasn't evaluating my decisions on a daily, weekly, or monthly basis. I was not open-minded to learning from other people. I was very rigid and arrogant. I was foolish. I was naive. I thought I knew exactly what I was doing. Certainly was not giving any thought to the victims in this hedge fund who were losing money. I'm not blaming UBS. I have to own my own choices. I have to own and accept that I played an integral role in people losing money by turning the other way for commissions. But eventually it moved from just turning the other way to actively being involved. And that came about 1.5 years after I was working with my client, Keith, the hedge fund manager. He asked my senior business partner and me to attend a meeting in Century City at a little sushi spot. And I said, why are we attending this meeting? What's the goal? And he said, well, I have a potential client who wants to give $5 million or so to our hedge fund. And I said, well, do I have to be at the meeting? And he said, I need you to be at the meeting. Okay, he's thinking about giving me $5 million. I need you to sit there and talk. I said, dude, I don't really want to be at that meeting. And he said, we're on our way to your office. We'll meet you downstairs at the sushi spot. You and Kenny need to be at the meeting. And when you have a guy paying you $100,000 a month and making up the lion's share of your production, you go to the meeting. Okay, it really works. That's how it works. So we attend this meeting, as I wrote in Lessons from Prison. A few minutes into the meeting, my senior partner, Kenny, looks at John, who's thinking about giving $5 million to Keith, the hedge fund manager. And John says, he's so impressed with Keith and how everything is going. He loves the idea of giving him this $5 million. And then Kenny, my senior partner, said, so what is the primary factor? What is the primary reason you're going to give Keith your $5 million? And John said, well, haven't you seen the rate of return on the hedge fund? Performance sells itself. Those 3 words are actually in my plea agreement. Performance sells itself. So if any of you have watched any of my YouTube videos, or I tend to ramble a little bit, I can tend to wrap it up. That was a time where I was not rambling. When I heard John, the prospect who was going to give $5 million to Keith, say performance sells itself, let me tell you what I went into shutdown mode. I didn't hear anything. Like we got to get out of here. Like, the meeting's over. So at the end of this meeting, Kenny and I, my senior partner, realized that we think we're in a lot of trouble because this investor gives the money, which he ultimately did. And then we simply revert to, we have this disclosure document. Then over the next 3, 4, 5 months, it was very quiet. My client actually had a few months of decent performance and success managing money. But then out of the blue, we began to see press releases. And I've shared my screen. I want everyone to take a look at this. We began to see press releases that my client was issuing in and around on the internet. And essentially, in this press release dated October 27, 2004, it says, Keith Gilbert to speak at prestigious London Investment Management Conference. Capital Management Group announced today that Keith Gilbert, its founder and managing partner, has been invited to speak. Okay, let's just jump to the last paragraph. Capital Management Group operates no-load performance-based funds, including one which has a principal guarantee feature, which have dramatically outperformed the market over the past 7.5 years, with an average annual return in excess of 27% net of all fees. So when our team read this press release, we were concerned. We knew that our client had lost millions of dollars. Yet he's issuing press releases that are talking about 27% average annual return. Further, we had attended a meeting with a gentleman who was investing based on this return. And what went from concern and comfort with the disclosure letter went to there's eventually going to be massive fallout. Can we extricate ourselves from this situation, if at all? And as we revert back to the corporate culture a little bit, in and around this time, this is November of 2004, just a few weeks later, UBS began to get very concerned that hedge funds like Keith were bringing in clients that had too little money, didn't have enough money under management. So getting back to the point of a mutual fund, with a mutual fund, you can invest $100, $50, dollar cost average, $500 a month. Great. If you invest in a hedge fund, you should have significant assets under management. You should have significant net worth. And UBS decided they were going to have a policy that any broker that had a hedge fund manager as a client, there had to be at least $100,000 minimum to take any money. And to do that, I had to reach out to a number of my clients who had hedge funds. And I said, look, the bad news is you send in some clients or checks that are $10,000, $20,000, $50,000. Can't do it anymore. The minimum is now $100,000 if you would like UBS to continue to be the custodian of your assets. And a number of clients were upset with this policy change. They didn't like it. Some left. And Keith called and said, look, I'm sure there's a lot of brokers in Los Angeles who would love someone like me who does at least $100,000 a month in production. Some of the checks I send in are less than $100,000, including some of them are from retirement accounts. If you want me to continue to trade with you and not go elsewhere, I need you to continue to take these checks. So despite the policy that UBS had issued about a minimum of $100,000, we violated that policy for Keith under the rationalization that we were going to grandfather him in. And you'll see this email I sent the 9th of November 2004 that said, I left you a voice message with the good news. I wanted to let you know that I received permission to accept and transfer IRAs below $100,000 into the fund. That asterisk, by the way, is by an FBI agent who did that in front of me. I appreciated that. No letter is needed. We will be fine going forward and can continue to accept these accounts. Please let me know if you have questions. So now Keith, despite the losses and the commissions, to a degree sort of knew that he owned us because of our production, knew that we were willing to violate this policy for him. And eventually what happens is it all comes crumbling down, right? So you just saw a letter from October and then one from November. Here's one that actually was shown to me December 15th, 2004. December 15th, 2004, my branch manager called me into his office and said, I want to talk to you. I said, what would you like to discuss? He said, I'd like to talk to you about this fax that I just received. This is the second page of the fax. The first page of the fax said, is this true, with a question mark. And then I looked at this document. I read it, then my branch manager said, sign your name for me 8 times. And I did. And he said, let's read the letter. And I said, okay, we can do that. And it says, Mr. Gilbert, the above referenced accounts are managed by Capital Management Group with UBS Financial Services as the custodian. In the unlikely event that CMG ceases to exist or can no longer perform its duties as a portfolio manager, all assets are guaranteed and insured for their full market value by UBS Financial Services. Sincerely, Justin Paperny. So this letter was sent to an investor of his. You'll notice it was on UBS letterhead. And I learned that day that when Keith was in my office, he would leave and easily grab some letterhead, unbeknownst to me. He would then take this letterhead that he had stolen, write a letter, forge my name, send it to his investors, giving them comfort that their assets were insured if, God forbid, he goes out of business. So my branch manager asked me to sign my name 8 times to confirm if that was my signature. Of course it was not. And that's when the whole investigation began, December 15, 2004. Then everyone begins to kind of deny and play dumb. My branch manager said, well, who is this guy Keith again? And walk me through how you know him. And I said, well, he's been a client for several years. Remember the disclosure documents? He generates hundreds of thousands of dollars in production. Keith, he begins to play dumb. My senior partner begins to say that he's more involved peripherally. I manage the day-to-day. He's the senior broker dealing with other clients. Everyone kind of begins to run and protect themselves. And that day, UBS said, would you be comfortable speaking with corporate compliance the next day? Now, my mom had been a paralegal for more than 30 years. I'm not stupid. I knew I should have gotten a lawyer, but I think to a degree I lacked probably the discipline to retain a lawyer. I just wanted to get this behind me. And the next day, I agreed to interview with UBS corporate counsel for, 8 or 9 hours. And at the end of 8 or 9 hours of an interview, they said, we don't want you to come in until we have clarity on what's going to happen. I said, well, what about my senior partner? What about Kenny? He's still working. They said, don't worry about Kenny. Do not come in until we have clarity on what's going to happen with your career here at UBS. Get out. And then nothing happened until the 11th of January 2005 when my branch manager actually called and he invited me back to the office. And that day, walked in, he said, we've decided to fire you for inconsistent answers you gave during the interview with corporate compliance last month. And I said, you're firing me not for working with a hedge fund manager who generated commissions despite the losses. That's not why you're firing me. You're firing me for inconsistent answers. You're saying I gave, when I agreed to meet with corporate counsel without a lawyer, they said yes. So then 2 very big guards emptied my office, walked me down to my car, and just like that, my life had changed from a significant earner to getting fired, wondering what's next and what do I do? And then nothing happened for the next 3 months. I began lying to people. I told them that I willingly left the brokerage business to go work in real estate or hedge funds and raise money for asset managers. I lied to some clients, telling them that it was my choice to leave and they should stick with Kenny and allow him to still manage their money. And I figured I could find a way. I just prayed that it would never get worse than getting fired. At the time, I thought it can't get any worse than this. I've lost my job, but I'm 28, I'll be okay. And then for the next 3 months, as I said, not a whole lot happened. And then the 28th of April, 2005, 2 agents, one of them Paul Bertrand, friend, showed up at my front door at my home and walked in and literally, I'm just over 5'10". They had a binder of every email I'd ever sent as an executive. It went up to like my belly button. They wheeled it in. I said, guys, what do we have here? And it was every email I ever sent as an executive dating back to my days at Bear Stearns. I said, I think I should get a lawyer. They said, good idea. You want to call someone? I said, I think I do. And a month later, May 28th, 2008, Paul Bertrand, another agent, me and my lawyer, we had a 2 to 3 hour interview. And in that interview, they wanted to learn more about my role and conduct as a broker at UBS. They wanted to learn about my relationship in working with this hedge fund manager. I will tell you, leading up to that meeting, I lied to my lawyers. I flushed money down the toilet. Did not work openly and honestly with my lawyer. I was ashamed. I was embarrassed. I was nervous. He was very powerful, made a lot of money, big suits, expensive. I was afraid to speak openly with him, so I kind of lied and dodged and feigned ignorance to this fraud, claiming that I was a victim. So I didn't really give him a chance to represent me. He didn't know the truth. And in this meeting, Paul Bertrand said to me, Justin, do you ever remember a press release talking about a 27% average annual return? I said, Agent Bertrand, I got a lot of emails in my time, and it would be hard for me to remember every email I ever received. A little dismissive, a little rude. They don't like that. FBI does not like the blow-off. He said, okay, so you don't remember a press release with 27%. And I'm thinking, how many times I got to tell this guy I don't remember a 27% email? I said, no, I don't. This is maybe 90 minutes into the interview. So then he smiled. He kind of shook his head. Just like that. And he reached over into the binder that was like 5 feet tall, pulled out a document. He asked me to read it. And I did. I sure did. This email was sent from my client, Keith, to me, which says, I've never lied to you. And I said to Keith, is that the pot calling the kettle black? I enjoyed your press release talking about the Guaranteed Return Fund and 27% gains a year. Who are you to judge? I've always tried to help you. Then the FBI agent, Paul Bertrand, said, have you ever seen a press release talking about 27% a year? And I said, I may have seen a release. And we just all sat there quietly for a couple of minutes. It was like an awkward silence. And I knew that my life had forever changed. And I learned years later that had I told them the truth in that interview, I never would have been prosecuted. They never would have pursued charges. You don't lie to the FBI. I was ashamed, embarrassed. I didn't want to own it. It wasn't perjury. I wasn't under oath, but it was obstruction. I deliberately tried to obstruct an investigation by lying to them. All I had to do was tell them the truth, but I was too scared. And from there, nothing happened for the next year. That's the thing with white-collar crime. The hardest part of the experience is the waiting and wondering. Federal prison time can be fairly easy. Not now with my brothers and sisters on lockdown for 14 days because of this coronavirus. But generally, life in a minimum security camp is pretty easy. The hardest part is the waiting and wondering what you're going to get. So after that interview, I said, what's happening? Am I in trouble? They're going to indict me. Are they going to arrest me? Are they going to, like they did with Felicity Huffman, 6 a.m. with guns and dogs and helicopters? Are they going to come and arrest me? That was my fear after that interview. But then after 3 months and 6 months and 9 months and 14 months, nothing happened. And then maybe a little 12, 13 months, I should say, after that, I woke up to read this press release. Well, it was a year later. There you go, April 28th, 2006. 1 year to the day after the FBI showed up at my front door. By the way, I'd go to prison 2 years later, April 28th, 2008. And on the 28th of April, 06, I read that the founder of an investment firm that operated a hedge fund had agreed to plead guilty to federal charges, admitting that he'd lied to investors. And at the end of this release, it reads, Gilbert also admitted that he conspired with an account manager at a major brokerage firm to mislead investors with respect to the performance, the risk, and the oversight of the major brokerage firm. For some reason, my mom read this and called me. She said, are you the unnamed co-conspirator? I said, I can't be. It's been more than a year. I've been selling real estate in Calabasas. I'm killing it. It's been a year and a half since I left the brokerage industry. They wouldn't let me sell real estate and do these types of deals if they thought I was a criminal. No way. That doesn't make any sense. And then my lawyer called and confirmed, of course, what I already knew, the obvious. Because of my short-sighted, disgusting, greedy, selfish choices and putting myself first, I knew I was the co-conspirator, of course. So my lawyer said to me, I just spoke with the U.S. Attorney David Willingham, who's a USC alum, who's now a friend and an excellent defense attorney in Los Angeles, sends me clients. David said, here's the deal. Your guy's looking at 7 years. And I'm like, what guy? And my lawyer's like, you're the guy. You're looking at 7 years. I said, well, that's 7 years? How long is Keith, my co-defendant, looking at? They acknowledge he's the orchestrator. They acknowledge that it was his Ponzi scheme. They acknowledge that he was stealing money. They acknowledge that he was lying to people to raise money. I'm just the broker who was executing the trades. If I'm looking at 7 years, like what is he looking at, 30? And my lawyer said, no, he's looking at 2. He's going to get 2 years. You're going to get like 7. And that's when I learned about the twisted, warped nature of the criminal justice system. It doesn't matter if you orchestrated the fraud or if you were swept in. Government values cooperation. Government values cooperators. They value people that accept responsibility. They value people that are willing to say, I made bad choices, I'll do better. My co-defendant did that. So while I was playing golf and selling real estate and thinking I had gotten past this, he was cooperating every single day with the FBI. And that's the reason that despite my role on the periphery, even as the government would acknowledge I was looking at a lengthier prison term, and my lawyer said you can go to trial and lose and get a decade, or we can try to cut a deal and try to get the shortest sentence possible. I said, okay, I'll take a deal. Just do not issue a press release. It would be really devastating to my mom. Do not issue a press release. It will kill my parents. He said, it doesn't work that way. We don't really have say in that. But I'll ask. So my lawyers reached out to David Willingham, the U.S. attorney, and said, Justin will plead guilty. They negotiated a deal where I pled guilty to 1 count of conspiracy to commit fraud. Asked them not to issue a Department of Justice press release. I think they laughed and said, we have to. They issue these press releases as not only to embarrass the defendant, and it brings some good feelings to the victims, which I understand. They also do it as a deterrence for people like you. That they hope it deters you from breaking the law. So you understand if you take advantage of others for your own gain, you're going to wake up to see your name on the DOJ website, New York Times and LA Times as a thief, felon, and crook and scammer. That's why they issue press releases. And with that press release came my guilty plea and an inevitable sentencing. And then the only reason I didn't get several years in jail was because my co-defendant who was cooperating was caught lying during his cooperation. You don't lie if you're cooperating with the feds. That's a quick tip for all of you soon-to-be defense attorneys or friends. You don't lie to the feds. And he did. They ripped up his plea agreement. Essentially, much of what he had said against me or gotten from me during his cooperation they couldn't use. They came back to me. When I say they, it's the Department of Justice. They gave me a second chance at veracity to walk them through what happened at UBS, to help them understand the corporate culture, how we allowed these commissions to continue, why we created this disclosure document, what are soft dollar commissions, what are hedge funds, how did you allow, what role did you play in this? So because of that open and honest communication, primarily with the Securities and Exchange Commission, I went from what would have been 5 years in prison to what ended up being a federal prison sentence of 18 months. Now I will tell you, and something that I worked on in Lessons from Prison, I was still somewhat manipulative leading up to sentencing. I wasn't terribly remorseful. Like some defendants, I only said I was sorry because I got caught. Like some defendants, I only did volunteer work because I thought it could help me at sentencing. Like some defendants, I only paid back money because I thought it could help keep me out of jail, not because it was the right thing to do. And that ends justifying the means is a big part of the reason I ended up in prison. I never paid attention for years to my behavior. I was just so fixated on an end, what was best for me. And at that time, what was best for me was getting the shortest possible prison sentence. And I had said whatever I had to say to try to get there. And you know what? To a degree, it worked. To a degree, it worked. I was looking at 5, 6, 7 years. I got sentenced to a measly 18 months inside of a minimum security camp. And admittedly, it didn't really hit me until I surrendered to federal prison. And as easy as life can be on the inside, you're still confined. You're still told where to sleep, when you can eat, what type of job to have, how many phone minutes, separated from your community. You're still confined. And during that confinement, I began to recognize how far I had fallen. And I began to study ethics and philosophy and began to write about it from prison. And I wrote home one time, I've shared this story, where my mom said, well, you should do this when you come home. It will impact people. And I said, I don't think anyone would listen. And she said, why would nobody listen? So I wouldn't have listened. I wouldn't listen to a guy out of jail talk about ethics and philosophy, because the last thing that I ever could have imagined, Mom, was that I would go to prison. So if I gave this lecture, if I gave a talk about ethics and finance and white-collar crime, I'd have been like some of the students who sleep and text and tune out. I get it. I probably would have done that because I could have imagined getting the rarest disease before ever becoming immersed in the criminal justice system. That's part of the reason that I know till this day some people may tune out. You just don't think it could be your life. I assure you. I was raised in the hills of Encino, went to USC, and had a very successful career as an asset manager. Never imagined I can end up in federal prison. It's part of the reason I would have tuned out. I got to own and acknowledge that. So inside federal prison, I did a sense of introspection and thinking without boring you or sounding too cliche. And those efforts led to what is now a very unusual life on the other side. A life that, frankly, I would wish on no one. When I was released from federal prison in 2009, it was the worst economy since the Great Depression. I had Department of Justice press releases. I had lost my license as a consequence of my conviction. I lost my securities license, also lost my real estate license, as you read about in Ethics in Motion. I lost my real estate license as well, despite having 100 clients that loved me and wrote letters to the Department of Real Estate stating why I should keep my license. Lost that too. Financially destroyed. I gave every last penny to the government at my sentencing. All the victims were paid back. About $8.5 million. Doesn't change the sense of shame and pain they endure the rest of their life, having been stolen from. I want to say that clearly, even though they got their money back. But it was a very difficult transition to the other side. And at 33, recently released from federal prison, I did the same thing I did weeks after I graduated USC. I began cold walking. I began cold walking into law offices in downtown Los Angeles, peddling my book, Lessons from Prison, and cold calling professors across the country, like USC. The first invitation I ever had at USC was from Bob Sharlock, who was an accounting professor at USC. He was also one of my baseball coaches at USC, and he invited me to speak. And I was very passionate about sharing the story with the hopes that I can help one of you do better. Not in a scared straight sort of way. There's no data that scared straight works. Over the years, I've addressed probably more millions of people I get calls every now and again from someone who's in my audience, and they'll say, I'm in trouble. I say, when did you hear me speak? And you were in Pennsylvania 7 years ago during an accounting, I'm in trouble. They tell me the story, and I say, were you listening? They're like, no, not really. It was a good story. A dude who went to jail. I didn't think it could be me. So I wanted to begin to impact people in a positive way by being transparent and open about how good people can make bad choices. And that's how I'll wrap up before hopefully you have a few questions. During that first year, I began to get calls from white-collar defendants who had read my blog and were coming across my book, and lawyers began to refer me business. And many of them had the same story as me. They felt pressure in business, they rationalized their choices, and they seized opportunities. And over that first year, I had 25 federal prison consulting clients, and I chronicled 16 of them in Ethics in Motion, which I know you're required to read. And all of those stories, in writing them, not one of those clients had bad intent or had aspirations to begin their career to defraud and end up in prison or destroy their reputation. It was slow, subtle, bad decisions over a period of time and not examining them. And that's the case with everyone in that book. So those are the last couple of thoughts that I'll close with. As a baseball player at USC, I never read a book on how to field a ground ball. I never read a book on how to swing a bat. I just did it. As I wrote in Ethics in Motion, I would argue to do anything well, or as Aristotle said, requires continuous, deliberate practice over a period of time. When I graduated USC, I stopped pursuing those values. I would suggest that for any of you to be successful ethically, which of course will translate to the rest of your life, you've got to practice doing the right thing every day and holding yourself accountable, some things that I didn't do. And lastly, if you have to make a change, and if you are around people that might be unscrupulous or dishonest, don't try to change them. Don't try to fix them. Don't try to help them. Just run. Because in time, their bad behaviors and idiosyncrasies can really mesh their way into you, and you can begin to begin and act like them if you don't have the strongest ethical center. Just run. Don't try to help them. I cannot stress that. I can't stress that enough. And the last point before I'll wrap it up is understand your tendencies. Do you know them? Are you aware of them? There's a lot of people who will seek to exploit you in business, and if you're not aware of those tendencies, how will you know if they're exploiting you? Are you a people pleaser? Is it tough for you to say no? Are you very fixed and rigid and dogmatic and you can't be reasoned with? Those are things you need to think about, because if you're not aware of those tendencies, there are some people out there who will use their sixth sense to exploit you and get you in trouble. And I think to a degree part of that happened with me. So as I wrap up this sort of very unusual lecture from my home office in Irvine, of course I wish I were in class, as I wrap up, I will, I guess, close with how I opened. I ended up in federal prison, not out of just greed and shallowness, but because I made choices without thinking about how it would influence my community and family and my unborn children, of which I now have 2. And my 5.5-year-old daughter now asks, Daddy, why did you go to jail? Were the blankets scratchy? And things of that nature. I don't know where she hears these things, okay? So I wish you all well in your endeavors. I encourage you to be unique, to be yourself, and to find a sense of pleasure and satisfaction in going down your own path, your own road. And I think if you can do that and take these lessons to heart, you'll have a more productive business and life, and never have to endure what I went through. So thank you again, as always, for the invitation, Greg. I'm very grateful, and if there are any questions, I'm certainly happy to answer them.
Yeah, thank you, Justin. We actually have a bunch, so I'll start off, and then Professor Leonetti might have some as well. So I'll just go one by one here. So one of them is just to make sure everybody understands. So 2 things. How did you get considered to be guilty here, and was it really just that you knew what Keith was doing and it's in a paper trail? And then second of all, just to make sure we're clear, you said that had you cooperated with the FBI, even with all your emails, you think you would not have had prison. So I guess kind of a 2-part question there. Were you charged because of, believing that Keith was a crook? And then the second part was, if you had fully cooperated, do you think they would have then just said, yeah, we're fine, you're not going to have any jail?
So post-defense conduct is a big deal. And post-defense conduct for me, began December 15, 2004, when I was called into my branch manager's office. I chose to go down one path of lying and feigning ignorance. My senior business partner, who was never indicted, still a broker till this day, chose to go down the path of hiring a lawyer, speaking openly and honestly about his conduct. So we went in two very divergent paths. I think and was told when I lectured at the FBI, Paul Bertrand said, had I spoken honestly to them, they wouldn't have pursued it. They believed that I was a broker who turned the other way for commissions. Judge Wilson essentially said that in my sentencing. You were a broker who turned the other way for money. I would argue I did more than that. But because of lying to them and not speaking openly to them, that was, I think that the word they used was sexiness they needed to think I was a really bad guy. So they have a great deal of discretion. There's a lot of fraud they turn away from. They don't prosecute. It could be handled civilly. And there's tons of things that they know about, but they cannot prosecute absolutely everyone. And had I responded more appropriately, it does not appear as if I would have gone down the road of prosecution. It was the lying to them where they said, we just can't let this guy know. He had a chance. We gave him a chance, and he threw it in our face. The conduct that I engaged in was clearly securities fraud. Besides turning the other way for commissions, I attended a meeting where a gentleman invested because he thought a certain return existed. I engaged in a sense of willful blindness, thinking that if I don't say anything, I'm not responsible. So despite what was an apparent fraud and bad conduct, the government was willing to look the other way until my bad conduct continued. And I really just continued to show a pattern. It was hard to say my conduct was aberrational because I continued to make bad choices. And I guess the lesson is, if God forbid anyone here gets fired or gets in trouble for cause or gets wrapped up in something, the more quickly you own it and acknowledge it and don't blame anybody but yourself, the more likely you are to get a favorable outcome. Though it's hard to do at the time, because who wants to step up and admit to facilitating a fraud? It's sort of anathema to what we want to do. That's what you have to do to get the best outcome. I didn't have that advice or guidance at the time.
Got it. Okay, so thanks for that. So follow-up question, and we know it's speculative, but had you cooperated, had you not gone to prison, how do you think, and I know it's speculative, but just thinking about that, how do you think your life would have been different? I mean, do you think you would have had an aha moment? Do you think you would have just kept doing it until something else down the road tripped you up? What's sort of your perspective on that?
I was beginning to make very good decisions as a real estate agent after I was fired from UBS. That first big moment or aha moment for me was getting walked down to my car from the UBS offices in Century City. And I used to pray and beg and hope that I wouldn't get caught and I can just move past this. When I began to sell real estate, I began to really get back to the values that I think guided me when I got out of USC, of putting clients first. So the aha moment came for me when I got fired. As a real estate agent, I was very successful. In fact, the most impactful letter that was turned in to the judge, a character reference letter that my judge discussed, was a client who wrote a letter. He wrote how advice that I gave him was in his best interest, but it cost me a $75,000 commission. And the judge appreciated that because it kind of began to show like, okay, you're on the right track. You're putting your clients first. You're making better choices. So I think had I not gotten fired from UBS, I'd have probably remained an arrogant, entitled broker who thought I can get away with everything and no consequences, because there were no consequences for anything I did wrong. So I'd have probably been gone down the wrong path, and it probably would have ended up worse years down the road, because it would have just meant something bigger and worse, and the consequence would have been so much greater. So the initial aha moment was getting fired, and then of course once I was in prison, that was the aha moment of a lifetime, and I sought to use the time really productively to ensure it didn't define the rest of my life.
Got it. Thank you.
Justin, I've got a couple of questions.
Yeah.
If I could jump in.
Yeah, you jump.
So, the first, they're different, but they're related. So the first question is, would you mind sharing with us what a day and a week while you were incarcerated was like? That's question one. And then the second question is, how do you share what it was like to be incarcerated with your children and your spouse?
So that would take a long time, and I film a lot of videos on that on YouTube to address those questions. The first day in prison was very different from the last, or the first week. The first day I was scared, nervous. I thought it would be like what I saw in Shawshank Redemption or Cool Hand Luke, getting raped and beaten up. And then once I saw that minimum security camp, it was like a corporate office park. Okay, dorms and a track, and I knew immediately would be a chance to to recalibrate. My daily routine was deliberate. As I wrote in Lessons from Prison, I started at 4 a.m. every single day. Would have a couple of hours alone in the quiet room while the dorm was sleeping. At 6:30, I'd go to the chow hall. I went to prison very out of shape, overweight, and from 8 to 10 or 11 in the morning every day, I would exercise. Within a month of my surrender to prison, I was running 10 miles a day. I had a 60-day stretch in prison where I ran at least 10 miles every single day. So I exercised several hours every single morning, did my prison job in the kitchen, where scrubbing pots and pans, and that was 90 minutes. Then I'd have the afternoon to myself, and I started using my experience to produce content on the inside. More than just reading books, I encourage any defendant, anyone in prison, you've got to produce content that you can disseminate to stakeholders, people that are going to judge you upon your release. So it started with a diary, the diary became a blog, and the blog became a harbinger for my first book, Lessons from Prison. And that's how I'd spend my time in prison, waking early, reading, writing, thinking, exercising, avoiding drama, doing my prison job, avoiding, creating content, and I'd go to bed at like 7 o'clock every single night like an old man. Okay, so that was my routine. In bed at 7, up at 4, production of content, preparing for the hardest part, which is coming home with a sullied reputation. And that's what I'd encourage any federal prisoner to do. The creation of content really changed things for me on the other side, because I could not just tell people what I did, I could show them. With respect to my children, my son is 2 years old, my daughter's 5.5, but she's seen me on TV and the Washington Post. I did like the interview with Dr. Phil and talking about prison, and we have a number of clients in the college varsity blues case, the college admission scandal case, and she's curious. She hears prison and daddy, and why did you write a book with prison in it? And all she ever says is, "Were the blankets scratchy in jail?" I don't know where she got this from, but I knew as my children get older, I'm going to want to discuss this with them. I'm going to want them to know that this didn't define my life, that my experience of going to prison was better for them, and it's going to help them be better executives and people. And it's, if anything, it was a good thing, as insane as that may sound. So I haven't yet had that talk with them. They're young, but my daughter's beginning to get inklings because I've been on TV so much. With respect to my wife, that was always a goal for me, to be able to convey who I could become, or not judge me for bad past decisions. So when I came home from prison, I actually met my wife on JDate, the Jewish dating website. And I was on my way to lecture at the Pepperdine Law School at the time, and she called me. We were connected. She was in Europe working, and she said, "So, what do you do?" And I said, "So tired of telling people what I do, and I'm a prison consultant and writer." And I said, "Just go to my website. If you're okay with it, let me know." And it was very dismissive because I'd been out for so long, and I was tired of talking about it. So I sent her to my website, as terrible as that sounds. And a week later, she called, and this is where the content helped. She said, I read about your story, and I'm just really inspired by what you've done, and it must have been difficult. And I'd love to learn more. And I read your book because it's free on my website at whitecollaradvice.com. And then we got together, and I remember I texted, I think, my business partner at the time, Michael Santos. He's still my business partner. Mike was actually still in prison. I emailed him, not text, and I said, this is the woman I'm going to marry. She can see me for more than bad choices I made. And it's very empowering for me that Sandra, a woman who went to Cornell, who had a very successful job, was willing to see me for more. And that all stemmed from beginning to accept responsibility, from being authentic and acknowledging I made bad choices and asking people to judge me for who I could become. And she did that. Not everyone. Till this day, there are people that still brand me as a felon and a crook who will never see me for who I'm striving to become. And that's just a consequence of cheating. It's okay. There's an email that leaked a few years ago. I had a speaking invitation at a big university, and following, I was the highest ranked speaker in the group, in part because I think I was talking about jail so much and people probably found it fascinating. But then they sent an email that said, well, we definitely have to invite him back, but I don't know if we should pay him more because he got out of jail. He'll probably take any work, right? And it's a good lesson. It wasn't driven by data, by the reviews, by what people in the audience said, that this was enlightening and informative, the highest ranked speaker. You think performance should drive pay, and the next honorarium I get it was, well, he's out of jail. We can't pay him more, can we? And that's just some of the stigma that accompanies, or the reality that accompanies going to federal prison. And it's something that I don't want my kids ever to endure. And it's part of the reason I'm so passionate about it. It's the reason my company's White Collar Advice, by the way. It's not federal prison advice. Prison can be the easiest part. It's life before prison. What do you do? Are you not killing yourself? I've had people call me and say, I'm watching your YouTube videos. There's a gun to my head. Tell me why I shouldn't kill myself. And then coming home, I can't be a doctor anymore. I can't even drive for Uber anymore. I can't even cut hair. Felons can't use scissors. What do I do? it's helping people manage and work through that is incredibly fulfilling, and something I hope my children will be proud of once they're old enough to understand it.
Justin, thank you so much. We're coming up on 50 minutes
Okay.
of the hour. A lot of questions, like a lot of questions. So let me ask you this. Are you okay if the students want to email you directly or contact you directly? Because we don't want to cut folks off, but we do want to finish on time. What would be a good way for people to contact you from this class, just to follow up on some of the questions that they have for you?
Yeah, if they have questions, maybe I could, jp@whitecollaradvice.com, if you want to disseminate that email. I'll respond to emails. Perhaps there are questions if they relate to prison and whatnot. I could film a YouTube video on it and then share it. I'm pretty active on YouTube and distributing free content. But yeah, I'm very responsive to emails. Till this day, I get emails from students at USC who heard me 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago. They'll say, man, something just happened in business and I thought of something you said and I want to reach out. And I'm like, it's really incredible. So if anyone has questions, they should write me. I'm incredibly responsive. And I'm very proud to be a Trojan. And USC was the first spot that ever invited me to speak. Greg, I'm not speaking as much. I'm deliberately kind of turning away from events and traveling. But USC, I will always come back. So anyone has a question, I will respond quickly.
Great. Well, that's great. And we'll share out your email address. I think they may actually have it already. So again, in the spirit of wanting to get everybody out on time, thank you, Justin. That was very impactful, much appreciated. Thank you to all the students who asked questions. Great job, thank you. And wish you all a good rest of the week, and we'll see you next week. Take care, everybody.
Thank you.